journalism in general and the internet, where there's journalism also.
Absolutely.
And you yourself said that a lot of the profits you want to put into online elements, aspects of the Inquirer. And I wonder if more and more that isn't where print journalism is going, including the Inquirer to some extent. I know there is pressure, and I don't say that's bad. I think that I understand it, for reporters to have an online presence. And that's very much part of the initiative being forwarded at the Inquirer. Now, do you think, though, that that will have ultimately a negative impact on the life of print journalism? How long can a newspaper survive when so much of it is going online?
You know what, I have to be mindful of, I mean, what our duty is to be the most important and credible source of news and information in the region, journalism. And if it comes to you in printed form, or if it comes to you on a PD, a BlackBerry, you know, we have to be, you know, basically our relevance is going to tie to being the highest quality form of that information with the most in-depth coverage of not just politics and news like that, but also the arts, et cetera, than anybody else. And we have to be a little bit ambivalent as to how it gets to you. I can tell you, at least in the short term, the printed product is read by people over 35, 65% of them pick it up every day. It really is where all the money's being made. But we need to also invest online. But there is this idea that you can somehow run. I'm not going to mention one of the most famous global consulting firms, though. And I spoke to a partner there who told me about, he said, you know, for a large company, we did a study, and this one particular paper, they have 90 journalists. And they said, what if we totally went online? We wouldn't have any printed product. What would be the implications of that? He said, we did this study, we went back, and we talked about a lot of other things, but bottom line is, you could only afford 19 journalists. You just can't get the dollars. Politico, which is a terrific new politics site, Politico.com, they have 35 or so journalists. Again, we have 450. And there was an article in the New York Times about how they have 2.5 million unique visitors a month. By the way, we have 5 million now at Philadelphia, Philly.com. They said all of their profits come from their 3-day-a-week printed newspaper in Washington for Politico. So even here, the most lauded online site, which is being they're making their money out of the printed product. So, you know, there's a transitional period, and someday it might all be online, or we'll have household printers, et cetera, and we want to make sure that we're au courant on that whole process. But the fact of the matter is, if there's, pick a number, 25,000 journalists, if all printed newspapers went away tomorrow, you'd have to get rid of about 80% of those journalists. And America and democracy would suffer dramatically.
So you don't see that happening? You don't see print journalism changing radically in the near future?
I think the job of journalists will continue to change radically. And I think print journalists have to be mindful of being able to understand the needs of online and updating your stories and doing all those things, which are different than what you had learned 30 years ago when I was at college, you know, kind of a thing. But I don't think print journalism is going away. I think there's a convenience factor to a printed product that will be here for some time. I think that we may be going more to the European model where the printed product is more costly. I mean, we raised our rates, our subscription, our individual paper price from 50 to 75 cents. And people said, oh, you'll single copy, you're going to lose 10%. We lost 3% of our single copy sales. And the net was profitable for the business, and therefore we didn't have to lay off journalists, and we could invest back in the paper. So I think what you're going to see is, you know, there are free papers in certain markets that are hemorrhaging cash. So, you know, I guess I saw it when I went into a local convenience store, and I saw somebody buy their cup of coffee for $1.50, a pack of cigarettes for $5.25, a sandwich that had been made in a factory somewhere probably a month ago, defrosted and toasted in there for $2.50, and our paper was 50 cents, and I thought, this person was really into sports. This is the best part of his day. I think he'll be willing to perhaps spend an extra 25 cents for it, and we found that they did. So I think newspapers will become more expensive, but relative to everything else. I mean, where else can you pick something up over the course of the week, spend $6 and get $2,000 of coupons in it? Let alone that, let alone learn, let alone read international, local, political, health news, Sudoku. I mean, all these things in one package.
Okay, another question before we move on to some other things. About this, you said that the role of the journalist will have to change. You know, all these things that will have to be done in terms of juggling internet and you know, writing stories in different sorts of ways. Do you think that the investigative side, that traditionally, you know, digging side of journalism, will become more consolidated perhaps in a few individuals? It will become more homogenized. It will become less, well, papers will be unable to spend as much.
I think this is, that's what I worry about for our country. Yeah. I mean, because what we, you know, I was with Paul Steiger not too long ago, who is chairing a thing. He used to be at the Wall Street Journal, I think something called ProPublica, which is foundations have given him the money to go hire 25 investigative journalists to cooperate with various news organizations around the United States. But before I had dinner with him at the Annenberg Center, I happened to say to my editor, Bill Marimo, Bill, you know Paul, tell me, how many investigative journalists do we have? He said, we have 7 full-time, 6 or 7 full-time, and about 20 at any given time who are working on investigative projects. So here we have 6 full-time, let's say, say 16 in Philadelphia alone, with just the Inquirer, let alone with the Daily News has a couple and other papers, and I'm sure another. ProPublica can't do the job. 26 people can't do the job across the entire United States if 16 to 20 in Philadelphia, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So if we don't do it, I mean, I saw a story recently by a television station that was, you know, such and such news has learned, and it was a story about a fitness club that there was mold in their bathroom. Well, you know what, I could get a Petri dish for $4 now, I remember that from science class, and way over here, and we'd come back in a week and I would say, in the picture gallery of Drexel University, fungus was found. I mean, and it scares people, but it's not really news. I mean, and that cost us $3.50 for the Petri dish. What we do, which is digging into information with highly trained journalists who have gone to Michigan, you know, great schools, or Penn, or Harvard, or Drexel, and have got advanced degrees and have learned database programming and all these sorts of things. What those people do isn't cheap. And when it's vetted by an editor who's won a Pulitzer Prize, who's making low but 6 figures, that's not cheap. And yet, for America, if we don't do it, you know, nobody's going to do it. So we have to find out as a country, you know, when sometimes people say, well, young people get their information online, what I worry about sometimes is, you know, young people are getting information about Britney Spears and whether she was arrested last night or she's wearing underwear. They're getting that. They really don't know anything about some of the things that are very important about our country and about our city and our region, et cetera. So,
well, it's nice to hear you. I mean, it's interesting that, I mean, I guess you were the consummate PR man at one time in your life, and now you have brought a lot of that energy and a lot of that ability to bear on the newspaper side. And to hear you talking for newspapers, and I guess you're now dedicated to quality journalism.
I've never worked harder and made less money in 20 years, to be honest with you.
So you're sticking with this endeavor.
Oh, yeah, no. This is work. I mean, I was talking to a group of journalists last week, and I said there's all kinds of challenges in life, and I've been blessed. I mean, my mother was a waitress. My father was a claims adjuster and later on an auto glass shop. They worked very hard, never flew in an airplane so I could go to great schools and stuff like that. I've had a certain amount of success, as has our entire investor group, and they're very much in the same focus. And there's all kinds of challenges out there, but this is important work. This is God's work we're doing.
Okay.
Okay, this is God's work.
Well, you're very much a Philadelphia person, which I think is part of that. I mean, you're on the board of the zoo and the art museum and many other institutions. So if I could even go back in time, you're somebody who, when you were working in advertising and public relations, and you had your own firm, many of the firms were leaving Philadelphia for New York City. You stayed here. So tell us a little bit about your devotion to Philadelphia as a city and what you see in this city that has kept you, I mean, obviously in investing in our newspapers, that is a statement. What is it about Philadelphia that you're devoted to?
Well, I just love this region, and I love, you know, I have a house at the Jersey Shore, and, you know, I've actually, the first time I ever, you know, spent the night in Philadelphia was the day I started my freshman year in college, and I was kind of, but I mean, I've lived in other areas. I've lived in Atlanta, I've lived in Washington. They're great spots. But there's something about this part of the region, this part of the country. There's something about the history, personal history, not just historical Ben Franklin history. The legacy of that. I find the beauty of the region, the seasons, the rich treasures that we have in terms of not just arts and things like this, and neighborhood. Just a great place to raise it. So with different times when I have had opportunities to go to New York or something like that, I've always felt like, you know, I'm a Philadelphian in a broader sense, and so I'm going to see if I can bring smart people to come to Philadelphia to work here in an environment that I think is a little bit more straightforward. I mean, you know, New York, I mean, I'm up there a lot for business, but there's a certain, I think, insincerity, to be honest with you about that. You know, what's great about, I tell people, this region, to come to the Philadelphia region, it's kind of like, you know, it's like Mayberry except a lot bigger. I mean, you can quickly get your arms around this place. I mean, what other area can somebody say, I know that I've met the president of Drexel University, I've met the president of Penn, I've met the president of this bank, I've met the president of the zoo, I've met people working on this or that, I've met architects, artists. I mean, you can do all those things. You get into certain markets like New York City, you're in the fashion district, or you're just in hedge funds, or you're just in this thing. And here, I think there's a chance in this region, if you want to roll up the sleeves and get involved, and nobody's going to ask you, what did your father do for a living? And in fact, you know, there's a certain honor in saying, you know, my father installed windshields in cars. Now, what can I do together to help you? And I've always enjoyed that part of this part of the story.
Well put. I wonder if you would tell us one thing that you hope to do or hope to see done at the Inquirer in the next few years, some change or some innovation or some aspiration that you have for the paper.
There's you know, I don't have a specific goal. I mean, one of the things is I want us to be excellent. You know, when I started out in my advertising firm, I mean, I just said, you know, I don't know how big this is going to be, but I want to be great at it. I want people to say they have 5 people or 10 people or 15 people, however that is, and make enough money that we can pay our bills and make sure that we're growing and we have money to invest back. But I just want to be known for being great at what this is. And before we knew it, a couple years later, we were $275 million in billings, and we're the largest advertising and PR firm in the history of the region.
So you hope to overtake the New York Times, is that it?
You know what? I want people to say, I think we're getting there. I want people to say in a year or so, it's one of the great regional papers in the United States. I mean, we're not the New York Times. We don't want to be the New York Times.
We don't want to be a national paper.
In New York City, the New York Times is the 4th most successful newspaper. It's number 4. I don't want to be number 4. I want to own this region, this 4th largest market in America. I want us to be connected from the high school and grade school level all the way up to the most sophisticated arts. I want to feel like, you know, 30 years from now or some future time that somebody says, you know what, he came in, he led a great group of people, he attracted other talented men and women. They all did the right thing for our region.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Brian Tierney, for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us today at the Drexel interview.